the universe according to Virgil. In case you haven't guessed, I'm Virgil, and this is our universe. It's big, isn't it? There's lots of things in it, and everything is related to something else. That's a lot of relationships, no? Yes. That's what I'm here to tell you, that everything is connected. Everything. But I can't do this all alone, or I drive myself crazy. And I don't even have a license. So to help me is my pal Cube. Cube, where are you?
I'm right here, Dr. Reality. I'll be helping with the presentation of information and data. I can show you pictures, movies, or diagrams. I can give you more information on any of the subjects the professor talks about.
Exactly! Bitch, where are you? This is one of the coolest cats that I know. And believe me, I used to hang with Miles. Now everybody's here. It's like a party, no? Yes, maybe. I don't know. Let's get started, okay? Come on! Welcome to my laboratory. All you have to do is start exploring. Click on anything that interests you, and I'll tell you all about it. Information from the Encyclopedia is always linked to Cube. So if you click her, you can find out more about any subject. Factoid is my friend, and he's your friend too. He will take you anywhere you want to go in the title. All you have to do is move the cursor to him, and he'll show you the icons that will lead you to any room that exists. That is, within this title.
Early train. Early train. Largest balloon. Airplane. Space. Submarine. Dinosaur. Phonograph. Plant. Atoms. Electric motor. Encyclopedia. Flashlight. Fossil. Light bulb. Magnet. The biology song. Everything's connected. It could be you. Frog. Largest cat. Radio. Alligator. Human skeleton. Telephone. Sundial. Hourglass. Hummingbird. Library. Compound microscope. Electron microscope. Jurassic period. Cretaceous period. Whale. Early train.
Before you can have a train, you must have a railroad, or a road or a rail on which the train can ride. Otherwise, you don't really have a train, because you're not on track.
In the 1600s, before there were trains, the English and Germans used railroads to haul coal out of their mines. Their carts were propelled by people or horses.
There have been lots of kinds of trains. There have been steam engines and diesel engines and electric engines and gas turbine engines, and they all go back to the first practical locomotive, which was invented in, Cube?
Yes, Professor, the first practical locomotive was constructed in 1804 by a British engineer and inventor named Richard Trevithick. Following his success, many other locomotives were built, primarily for mining.
What about passenger trains?
Well, it wasn't until 1829 that a train was built to carry passengers. But shortly thereafter, passenger rails sprang up all over the eastern United States.
And the steam locomotives were very popular, and they were used until what year?
Steam locomotives were used until about 1940. By the late 1980s, however, very few of them were still operating, like those used on tourist routes in Colorado. Most trains operating in the United States today are diesel-electric powered.
The largest locomotive still running is a Union Pacific Railroad Challenger, built in 1943. With a full cargo, it can pull 543.2 tons. Oh, can you imagine trying to get something that big underneath your Christmas tree?
The horse train race.
In 1830, an American named Peter Cooper tried to convince the B&O Railroad to use his new steam locomotive. His locomotive was called Tom Thumb, and it set out to prove that it was much faster than the horses they were using.
So they had a race between a horse and the Tom Thumb. The engine belt driving the locomotive slipped, and the horse won the first race. So they raced again, and this time the Tom Thumb won. It became the first steam locomotive to be used in the United States. Professor, why don't you explain how a steam engine works?
The water is heated in a boiler, and it turns into steam. The steam then creates pressure, which is used to push the pistons, to drive the wheels, and to run the belts. The whistle on the train was used to release the pressure so that the engine would not overheat. But these steam engines required a lot of water. That's why you can still find water towers along the railroads. They were used to fill the engines with water.
Professor, many people think that the term horsepower refers to that race.
The term was actually coined by a Scottish inventor named James Watt. He had created an engine and wanted to compare it to the horse, since the horse was used to do a lot of work. So he determined that one horse should be able to pull 550 pounds 1 foot in 1 second. He then claimed that his engine could replace 6 horses and called it a 6-horsepower machine.
We still use the term horsepower, and we define it as the ability of a machine to lift 550 pounds 1 foot in 1 second.
Diesel train.
Two important developments.
The horse train race.
Two important developments in the 1900s were the electric and the diesel-electric locomotive.
In the diesel-electric locomotive, which is known simply as a diesel engine drives generators that then power electric motors.
And the diesel was much more efficient than the steam locomotive, right?
That's right, Professor. The diesel can work more hours per day because, unlike the steam locomotive, it doesn't need to stop to restock its water supply. And it can carry more fuel. It can also pull more weight at lower speeds.
And the diesel engines were cheaper to operate because the fuels that they used were not as refined as the higher grade fuels like gasoline, which allowed them to pull heavy loads for low money. That's a winning situation.
That's right, but most cars use gasoline because they don't require the power that trains and trucks do. And diesel engines cause more pollution than gasoline-burning engines.
Look at that electric locomotive. Say, Cube, did we mention how it gets its power?
Actually, we didn't, Professor. The electric locomotive is powered by either an overhead wire or third rail laid beside the track.
Largest.
The largest balloons ever built can be inflated to stand 1,000 feet tall. But people do not ride in them. Isn't that right, Cube?
That's true, Professor, although some hot air balloons have been built to carry many people, like the Miss Champagne in 1988.
That was a huge balloon. Can you imagine how tired you get if you had to blow it up all by yourself? Here's a multiple choice question. Now that airplanes are everywhere, why do we still need these old-fashioned balloons? Is it A, because people who have a lot of hot air need a place to work it off? Is it B, because people like to see things at the circus floating in the air? Or was it C, because they can be used for surveillance and for military purposes because they are cheap and easy to use? Some people think balloons are just fun to play in. They are called sports ballooners.
Crews from 4 European countries are competing against the U.S. for the World Air Balloon Championship. Uh-oh, someone's let go of the string, and that balloon's going to get stuck on the ceiling.
Aside from fun, balloons do have a lot of important purposes.
That's true, Professor. They've been used for surveillance, for aeronautical tests, for collecting weather information, and at one time the post office even used them to deliver the mail.
Either way you say it, it's still a lot of hot air.
Zeppelin. Zeppelin.
Blimps, Zeppelins, and dirigibles are all almost the same thing. The basic difference is their structure. A blimp is a bag of air, but a Zeppelin or dirigible has a solid framework and tends to be longer and narrower, like a cigar, as opposed to a pumpkin.
In 1900, Count Ferdinand von Zeppelin flew his first dirigible. It was 428 feet long, with a top airspeed of 17 miles per hour.
And Zeppelin became the name of one of the great rock bands of the 20th century. Hit it, Pete!
Zeppelins were used for many things. In World War I, they were used for observation and spy missions. During the 1930s, they were used for commercial purposes, mostly to carry passengers. The German Graf II Zeppelin was built in 1928. It was 840 feet long and weighed 235 tons. It flew more than 1 million miles and carried over 13,000 passengers, many across the ocean.
This giant dirigible, the Graf Zeppelin, has just become the first airship to circle the globe. In 21 days, it covered 20,000 miles and only had to stop at gas stations and ask for directions twice.
Hindenburg.
The story of the Hindenburg is a tragic one.
25th anniversary of the Hindenburg explosion. The Hindenburg exploded while landing in the U.S. after a transatlantic run. The disaster spelled the end of dirigibles.
The Hindenburg was one of the largest and most beautiful passenger Zeppelins ever built. When it crashed, 36 people were killed. It was considered one of the worst disasters of the 20th century.
The ship's hydrogen gas was somehow ignited, and the entire ship was consumed in minutes. As a result, airships declined in popularity as a method of transportation. Today, all dirigibles are filled with non-flammable helium gas.
Airplane.
Have you ever had a dream where you could fly? I have. Everybody dreams of flying, but to fly for real requires a great amount of knowledge about the universe. Cube, help me out with this one.
Any human can dream of flying, but it takes very special people to dream of falling. Have a nice trip and see you next fall.
What is this?
Many inventors think big, but this one thinks small. This airplane has a wingspan of 23 feet and wears blue jeans with only a 26-inch waist. And no zipper, please. It prefers button flies.
I love to see these old movies.
Yes, it's a plane that looks like a tricycle, and its inventor plans to fly it over the ocean non-stop. Good plan, because those unscheduled ocean stops can really upset the passengers.
This will make you appreciate the modern chopper.
Here's the safest helicopter ever built. It never takes off and flies. Hey, has anybody seen the ground sickness bags?
What would the bird say the secret of flying is? It's all in the wings! It's all in the wings!
America sends its new F-11 thundering into the sky for a test of its revolutionary folding wings. If this works, the Air Force will test a self-laundering jet that not only folds its wings, but starches and fluffs them as well.
The wing of an airplane is called the airfoil. As you can see, it's easier for the air to move over a curved surface than the straight surface underneath the wing. And the faster moving air has a lower pressure because it's moving quickly than the slower moving air beneath the wing, so it pushes it up.
Propellers are also important to keeping an airplane in the air.
But we have to whisper because the birds get very jealous. Flying can be very hard work.
A propeller is driven by an engine. As it spins, it's like a screw that pulls itself through the air, or a bolt that pulls itself through a nut, or a corkscrew that pulls itself through a cork.
Well, that's when it's designed properly. It took man many years to understand this concept.
This strange bird is the result of 17 years' worth of effort by its inventor. Called the gray goose, it has yet to actually fly. Better change its name from the gray goose to the dead duck.
Eventually, people started to understand more advanced physics of flying.
And they came up with lots of wacky ideas. Let's see some examples, Cube. I love to see these old movies.
Man has always dreamed of flying, but some inventors have bad dreams, judging by these airplanes. I've heard of winging it, but this is ridiculous.
Smallest airplane. Smallest airplane. Smallest airplane. Smallest airplane.
The smallest jet aircraft can go 280 miles an hour.
It weighs 432 pounds and has a wingspan of only 17 feet.
Jet airplane.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Air Commodore Sir Frank Whittle. Please take a bow, Frankie. Sir Frank invented the jet engine. Pretty good, huh?
That's really impressive, Professor. He tried to convince the British Air Ministry that it would be superior to piston engines. When they refused his idea, he started his own company.
It just goes to show you, you have to stick with what you believe in. I think I'm going to have Cube tell you how the jet engine works. Cube?
The jet engine consists of a series of fans, a combustion chamber, and a turbine. As the first fan spins, it sucks air in. A series of compressor fans increase the pressure and push the air into the combustion chamber. There, a burning fuel heats the compressed air, which expands and is forced out a nozzle to create thrust. And as the air is pushed out, it flows across a turbine, which spins the fans that suck in more air.
Boy, just listening to that gets me so exhausted. So you see, this process is different from the pistons that power the cars. A jet engine sucks air in and compresses it to force it out the back at super high speeds. Cube, I'd like to see some more of these jet movies. Could you somehow show them to me?
The Air Force unveiled its newest weapon, the B-60 bomber. Everything about this plane is top secret. But we do know this. This beauty can carry over 90,000 little itsy-bitsy teeny-weeny bags of honey-roasted peanuts. The British and French have signed an historic agreement to finance this supersonic jet that will show Jerry Lewis movies on every flight. Here, diplomats from both countries sit down and practice screaming the word, "Lady person!" The Navy's newest supersonic plane set an unofficial speed record when it went over 700 miles an hour, breaking the record of 698 miles per hour set by a teenage boy delivering pizza.
Welcome to space. This is my favorite place because there's so much of it. If you want to explore, just click an object that you want to learn about, and Cube and myself will tell you what you need.
Uranus. The spacecraft Voyager 2 flew past Uranus in 1986 after a 5-year flight. Voyager 2 revealed to us a planet quite different from anything we had ever seen. Uranus is tipped on its side, and the planet's poles are both directed at the sun. Scientists don't understand why Uranus is positioned this way, but some theorize it's the result of a gigantic collision with another object which occurred in the early formation of our solar system. Saturn. Between 1979 and 1981, the spacecrafts Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 rocketed to Saturn, a planet 1 billion miles from our Sun. The spacecrafts measured that Saturn generates 3 times as much heat as it receives from the Sun. This is because Saturn continues to contract 4 billion years after its birth. The Voyager spacecrafts also found that each of Saturn's individual rings, while varied in thickness, are actually continuous streams of stellar debris. Yuri Gagarin.
On April 12, 1961, the Russian cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first human being to orbit the Earth. After circling the Earth just one time, he landed safely in Siberia. Phew!
Another Russian cosmonaut, Valentina Tereshkova, was the first woman in space. She was recruited in 1961 while working in textiles and pursuing amateur parachuting. On June 16, 1963, she piloted Vostok 6 and orbited the Earth 48 times.
Yuri Gagarin, the Sun. Most of the light that we get from our Sun comes from its thin outer layer called the photosphere. Above the photosphere is the chromosphere, a region where flames of gas burst through the solar atmosphere. Deep beneath the Sun's atmospheric shell is the core, where violent nuclear reactions are constantly firing. But the greatest explosions in the solar system are the solar flares, intense bursts of light that erupt with a force of billions of hydrogen bombs. The Sun. Apollo 11.
On July 20th, 1969, the Apollo 11 landed the first humans on the moon. They were astronauts Neil Armstrong and Edwin Buzz Aldrin, and they stayed on the moon for 21 hours and 36 minutes.
It took several missions to prepare for actually landing a man on the moon. Finally, on July 16, 1969, the Apollo 11 was launched on the Saturn V rocket and landed on the moon 4 days later.
Was the first thing he said, "Eh? Hey, this place is nice, but where's the burger?" Was it B? "Hey, look at the landscape. It looks like pizza." Or was it C? "Eat it, Cube."
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
Wednesday, July 16th, 1969. The end of the decade had arrived. At 9:32 a.m., Apollo 11, a 26-story, 6 million-ton rocket, was launched. Astronaut Michael Collins piloted the Apollo 11 command module. Astronaut Edwin Aldrin Jr. piloted the lunar module, and astronaut Neil Armstrong served as mission commander for the first manned landing on the moon. On Saturday, July 19th, Apollo 11 slowed as it entered the moon's orbit. Earth lay 238,000 miles beyond the horizon. The Eagle, Apollo 11's lunar module, separated from the command module Columbia and descended. Astronauts Armstrong and Aldrin watched through their window as the Eagle settled on the undisturbed lunar surface. After 2 hours of experiments and filming, astronauts Armstrong and Aldrin left an American flag on the moon, along with medals honoring American and Soviet spacemen who lost their lives, as well as a small disc carrying messages of goodwill from 73 nations of the Earth.
They collected soil samples, took photographs, and stuck an American flag into the moon's surface. With the help of communication satellites, they spoke to President Nixon and the White House, and to millions of people who were watching the first live television broadcasts from the moon.
On July 24th, the Apollo 11 splashed down in the Pacific Ocean near Hawaii. And because of this event, people started to say this annoying phrase, "Hey, they can put a man on the moon, but they can't fix my freezer."
Apollo 11. John Glenn.
On February 20th, 1962, John Glenn became the first American to orbit the Earth in outer space. This was a year after the Russian cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin orbited the Earth in April of 1961. John Glenn was launched into outer space on the back of an Atlas rocket. He rode inside the capsule called Friendship 7, covering 81,000 miles in 3 orbits around the Earth, which took 4 hours and 55 minutes. Cube, let's see a clip.
What on earth is happening here? 250,000 people turned out to welcome astronaut John Glenn. He's just returned from orbit, and he's being treated like a star.
Leading up to his brilliant career as an astronaut, Glenn served as a pilot in the United States Marine Corps. He flew a total of 149 combat missions in World War II and the Korean War. In 1957, he was the first person to make a non-stop supersonic transcontinental flight from Los Angeles to New York.
Setting a record, are you ready for this? 3 hours, 23 minutes, and 8.4 seconds to be exact. He was elected senator from the state of Ohio in 1974. What a great American!
John Glenn. Skylab.
On May 25, 1973, America launched its first orbiting observatory into space. The station was called Skylab because it was a lab in the sky. Pretty clever, eh?
Skylab followed a station launched by the former Soviet Union. Their first space station, Salyut 1, was launched in April of 1971.
Designed to orbit the Earth for an extended period of time, the crews were relayed back and forth on other space vehicles, and the longest stay of any one crew was 84 days.
Astronauts aboard took high-resolution photographs of the Sun and observed the Sun's surface, or photosphere, in a way that had not been possible from Earth.
Skylab also allowed us to study the effects of long-term weightlessness on the human body. We got some very important information pertaining to the loss of bone mass and muscle strength. Very important.
Since the heart is a muscle, this was a critical discovery. Today, we know to work within these factors whenever people are sent into space.
Skylab. The Gemini space program. In 1961, the Gemini space program came into being. Gemini was a critical first step in learning how to send a man to the moon. Between 1965 and 1966, the Gemini project launched 10 manned flights. The missions logged more than 194 hours and circled the Earth 600 times before it was decided that we were ready to send a man to the moon.
In ancient times, some people thought that comets could bring earthquakes and wars and famine. Others feared that the comet gases could poison them.
And still others believed a comet blazing through the sky was the soul of a king or hero on its way to heaven.
Today we know that comets, sometimes called dirty snowballs, are really ice and dust and frozen gases that orbit the sun.
But they're quite a bit bigger than a snowball. The head of a comet measures approximately 80,000 miles in diameter, although the icy core, or nucleus, is only a few miles across.
Comet. Space shuttle.
In 1981, Columbia was launched, and the space shuttle program was off to a flying start.
The shuttle program was designed to make visiting space more accessible and less expensive.
Before the space shuttle was invented, the astronauts were sent into space on the top of rockets in little capsules that descended into the ocean on a parachute. Not a very nice way to come home.
Today, however, American astronauts can be carried into space repeatedly by the space shuttle. First, because the shuttle lands on a runway like a glider, and second, because most of its parts are reusable.
Once in outer space, not only is the shuttle an amazing laboratory, an extraordinary vacation vehicle, but it can be used to fix satellites.
In the fall of 1984, the Space Shuttle Discovery retrieved a faulty telecommunications satellite from orbit and brought it back to Earth for repair. And in 1993, the Space Shuttle was used to repair the Hubble Space Telescope while it was still in orbit.
Jupiter. Between 1979 and 1981, the spacecrafts Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 traveled outward to our solar system's largest planet, Jupiter. Voyager took spectacular photographs of Jupiter's Great Red Spot, a 300-year-old storm on the surface of the planet. Winds were discovered in the Great Red Spot to be spinning in a circle 3 times the size of our own planet. As Voyager traveled past Jupiter, it measured the planet's unusual magnetic field, which extends millions of miles into space. Lunar landing. On July 20th, 1969, 500 million people gathered around TV sets all over the world to wait for the first Earthling to set foot on the moon. Countless millions more sat glued to their radios, listening to voices from the moon. Never before had so many people been attuned to one event at one time. All around the globe, a curious world awaited. Neil Armstrong.
When Neil Armstrong became the first civilian to enter the astronaut training program in 1962, do you think he knew he would be the first person to ever set foot on the moon? In July of 1969, as the commander of Apollo 11, he and his fellow astronaut Edwin Buzz Aldrin were the first men to walk on the moon. At least that we know about.
When the first astronauts were selected, they were chosen from military test pilots. In 1959, 7 astronauts were picked from 500 volunteers. Applicants had to be less than 40 years old, in excellent physical condition, no taller than 5'11". They had to have a degree in engineering and have flown at least 1,500 hours.
Is that all? Gee, maybe I should have tried to get in. And then they're ready for spaceflight. They're all dressed up but nowhere to go. So what they gonna wear, Q?
Well, Professor, I have a very interesting video. Here's a high-altitude pressure suit designed by the Air Force.
Now you can look like an astronaut with your very own spacesuit. We made a very special purchase, and for as long as supplies last, we're offering this suit with 2 pairs of pants for only $99.
Up.
Hey, Houston, we've had a problem here. Can say again, please. Houston, we've had a problem.
What began as a mission of scientific exploration became a question of survival. On April 11, 1970, Apollo 13 was launched. 56 hours into the flight, a news bulletin informed the nation that there had been a serious power supply malfunction. Apollo 13's lunar landing was to be terminated as the astronauts and NASA struggled with the crippled spacecraft. All unnecessary equipment was shut down in the command module in order to isolate the problem. My concern was increasing all the time, reports one astronaut on board. It went from, "I wonder what this is going to do to the landing," to, "I wonder if we can get back home again."
This is Apollo Control at 57 hours 46 minutes ground elapsed time. The black team of flight controllers is now on station in Mission Control Center looking at possible alternate missions as we have an apparent serious oxygen leak in the cryogenic oxygen in the service module.
Survival became a matter of initiative and ingenuity, as those on the ground and high above the Earth worked together and created inventive solutions to extending the life of Apollo 13. On April 17th, the astronauts on the dying spacecraft successfully splashed down to safety. Apollo 13 dramatized the ever-present risks of traveling into space. However, it also illuminates that the true character of man shines through in our unity under the most desperate situations.
This is the crew of Apollo 13. Wish everybody there a nice evening. Good night.
Sputnik.
On October 4th, 1957, the former Soviet Union successfully launched the first artificial satellite into orbit, and it was called Sputnik. I love to say that name. Sputnik, 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 Sputnik!
The purpose of Sputnik was to see if a body could be launched into orbit from Earth. This was the first time that the Earth had a satellite other than its moon.
During its brief stay in outer space, Sputnik was able to explore the Earth's atmosphere. 1 month after Sputnik 1 was launched, they launched Sputnik 2, except it had a little doggy on board. The first living thing in space, a little doggy called Laika. Here, Laika! Oh, Laika, you've been a bad dog. Couldn't you wait till we got into orbit?
On October 4th, 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik 1, the first artificial satellite. It was an aluminum sphere 23 inches in diameter and weighing only 184 pounds. Less than 1 month after Sputnik 1, the Russians launched a second Sputnik. This spacecraft carried the first living thing into space, a dog named Laika. Satellites.
A satellite is any object that orbits another object. They can be natural, like the moon or the Earth, which is a satellite of the sun, or they can be man-made, like weather satellites that are in the sky.
Whether natural or man-made, all satellites are kept in orbit by gravity. Without gravity, a satellite would fly off into space.
The strength of the Earth's gravitational pull on a satellite is determined by the mass of the satellite and its distance from the Earth. The closer and the more massive objects are attracted more powerfully than the distant light objects. Okay, you got it? Big and close, come here now. Far away, see you later.
And the more powerful the attraction between the two objects, the faster the satellite's orbit will be.
Before we launched our first weather satellite into space, our knowledge of the weather was mostly limited to what we saw outside our windows. Today, we can trace weather patterns developing across the globe with satellites orbiting our planet. A hurricane, for example, is seen by a satellite as a pattern of colors. From these readings, scientists can assess the temperature, intensity, direction, and behavior of the storm. The knowledge obtained from weather satellites has often saved the lives of populations within the storm's path. The solar system.
The solar system includes the sun and the planets that rotate around it. Guess what? We are part of the solar system.
Our solar system includes more than 50 moons, thousands of asteroids, and billions of meteors and comets.
The inner planets are Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars. They are all close to the sun and can be warmed by its beautiful rays. The outer planets are Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And the further away they get from the sun, the colder it gets.
The inner and outer planets are separated by an asteroid belt. The inner planets are called terrestrial, which means Earth-like. They have cores made of metal and shallow atmospheres, except for Mercury, which has no atmosphere.
Exit, print shop, activity center, theater, lab, encyclopedia, help, encyclopedia, lab. Space, submarine.
In 1620, a Dutch inventor decided that just floating on top of the water would not be enough. So he wrapped a wooden rowboat in leather and took a crew of 12 men under the water of the Thames River in London. It was the first submarine. We've come a long way since then. Cube, can you help us with some sub-data?
Of course, Professor. Here's a video clip.
Here she is, the Nautilus, the first submarine powered by nuclear fission. This submarine can stay underwater for months. So if anyone wants to know where the Nautilus is, tell them it's gone fishing.
The longest submarine in the world belongs to the United States Navy. It's almost the length of 2 football fields placed end to end.
That may be the longest, but that doesn't actually make it the biggest submarine in the world. The biggest submarines belong to the Russian Typhoon class, which are part of the Russian Navy. They're the biggest because not only are they long, They're also very wide.
They are much shorter than subs in the U.S. Navy, but they are very wide and strong enough to travel 4,800 miles while carrying 140 warheads.
The first submarine to be used as an instrument of war was invented in the 1770s. It was called the Turtle and was shaped like an egg and could carry only one person.
You know, during the American Revolution, the colonial navy actually used a hand-driven submarine to attack a British ship.
It was an unsuccessful attack.
Details, details. Let's move on. Here's a multiple-choice question. Submarines are used by A, little boys who are afraid to bathe alone, B, grandmothers who are afraid of eating cheese on their birthday, or C, scientists who do research and people in the military.
Aircraft carrier.
An aircraft carrier is basically a mobile airbase. Planes are stored below the deck and brought up and down in big elevators.
Aircraft carrier fleets didn't really exist until after the First World War, when the United States, Japan, and England began building them.
They were very important in World War II. A fleet of 6 Japanese aircraft carriers sent the planes that bombed Pearl Harbor in 1941 and caused the United States to go to war in the Pacific. Some aircraft used their own engines to take off. Others use catapults to help them reach liftoff velocity. When they land, a giant hook on the plane engages a rubber band-like device on the carrier. Boing! And it slows them down. Cube can tell you about the biggest aircraft carriers in the world. Can't you, Cube?
Of course I can, Professor. The U.S. Navy has aircraft carriers considered to be the largest in the world. They are 1,092 feet long and have almost 4.5 acres of flight deck. They can travel well over 30 knots and can carry a full crew of 5,986 people.
If you lined up the entire crew so they were holding hands, they would stretch 6.8 miles. And they'd probably make some good friends, too.
Largest battleship. Wheel.
The wheel is probably the most important mechanical invention of all time. Just ask anyone who's tried to drive to work on squares. The first wheel for a vehicle appeared over 5,000 years ago in what used to be Mesopotamia, but is now called Iraq.
Before the invention of the vehicular wheel, people used wheels to make pottery. The potter's wheel was invented some 7,000 years ago.
A potter's wheel is flat and spins horizontally. In the old days, someone would spin it with their hands, but in 1800, a little foot pedal was invented. This caused the wheel to spin, and the ball of clay that was in the middle could be shaped up into beautiful pottery.
The original wheel for a cart was solid and wooden. It was mounted on a round axle and secured by wooden pins. It wasn't for another 1,000 years that spoke wheels appeared, after sections of the solid wood were carved out to reduce the wheel's weight.
You can see how important the wheel is. It really, really, really is. And some wheels are used for crazy things, like roller skating horses. This one didn't take place till 1955. This cracks me up. Cube roll.
Here's a horse of a different color. Meet Jimmy, the world's only roller skating horse. It looks like Jimmy's really feeling his oats.
Boy, that's pretty good for 4 legs. I can't do that good on 2.
First automobile.
Hello, who is it? What do you mean guess? Does Alexander Graham Bell ring a bell? Of course, hello Alexander. It's Alexander Graham Bell who invented the telephone in 1870. Hold on, Alexander. Cube, how can we find out more about him?
Well, Professor, if they'd like to learn more about Alexander Graham Bell, you can go to the theater.
boy, I got to go, Alexander. There's people that want to learn about the phone. Can you imagine what it was like before the telephone was invented? Everybody would have had to yell a lot!
People lived without telephones until Alexander Graham Bell invented the first one in the late 1870s. A teacher of the deaf, Bell's experiments with a telegraph that could send many signals at once over a single wire led to his discovery. You see, a telegraph generally sent just one signal through a wire, where the telephone would be able to send many.
Here's how the telephone works. When you talk into the mouthpiece, a little vibrating diaphragm translates your voice into electrical signals, which then pass through the wire and move until it goes into the receiver and the earpiece on the other end, where it pops out and is translated back as sound. Where am I? I think I dialed the wrong number.
Regular telephone wires carry about 13,000 calls simultaneously.
That's a lot of voices for such skinny wires.
Not when you compare them to microwaves. Microwaves can carry as many as 36,000 voices at once.
Of course, Cube is talking about microwave radiation and not microwave ovens. But if we're talking about microwave ovens, I'd rather have a potato cooked in a microwave oven than on a skinny wire. A recent study showed that there are 425 million telephones used in the world, and 2/5 of them are in the United States. That's over 160 million phones. That's a lot of numbers to memorize. Can you imagine how big that phone book would be? Oh, can somebody pick up line 2452? I think it's ringing off the hook.